You're a mistake in a uniform. My stepfather Richard's booming voice bellowed into the wireless microphone, echoing through the grand oak-beamed hall of the Sterling estate, cutting straight through the soft piano chords entertaining 64 regional executives, port authority officials, and defense logistics directors. Look at you standing by the mahogany side door in those worn combat boots and wrinkled greens, pretending your cheap little administrative post in the army gives you an ounce of authority, while my son built our family's multi-million-dollar maritime transport empire from the ground up. I didn't flinch, nor did I lower my eyes. I stood erect beside the carved archway in my service dress uniform, my right thumb resting inside my coat pocket, feeling the raised, jagged edges of an old silver dog tag bearing the serial code Tango 39. At the head of the raised banquet floor hung a gilded banner celebrating Sterling Maritime Logistics, annual defense contract distinction. Standing beside Richard under the crystal spotlights was my stepbrother, Julian, wearing an Italian tuxedo, casually twirling a glass of aged brandy with a sharp, arrogant smirk. Standing right beside him, wearing a diamond-encrusted bracelet I had purchased for her with my overseas hazard pay, was my mother, Evelyn, her eyes cold, calculating, and completely detached. "Richard, hand over the mic." My voice dead flat, carrying the cold, metered discipline I'd spent 6 years perfecting as Captain Sierra Vance, Senior Forensic Auditor for the Army Criminal Investigation Division. "You sent an urgent summons to my battalion command at 0300 hours, claiming my biological father's military pension trust required an immediate biometric signature to prevent his estate from going into state receivership. I used your commanding officer's official channel to force your pathetic presence into this room in front of 64 civic leaders," Richard roared into the microphone, his heavy gold signet ring flashing under the chandeliers as an uncomfortable murmur rippled through the seated guests. "I wanted every key investor in this maritime district to see what an ungrateful freeloading fraud looks like. You spent 6 years hiding behind military red tape, while Julian worked 100-hour weeks expanding our deep-water shipping lanes. Meanwhile, you refused to contribute a single dime from your officer pay to help your own mother pay off her own home equity debt." My mother stepped up to the microphone, her face settling into a carefully rehearsed mask of tragic maternal disappointment. "It destroys my heart to say this in front of our distinguished colleagues, Sierra," Evelyn announced to the silent room. "I tried to shield you for years, but your bitter envy, your paranoia, and your malicious jealousy toward Julian made living under the same roof unbearable. Julian is securing maritime jobs for our state. You're just a broken, spiteful girl clinging to a uniform because you couldn't survive in the private world." A wave of quiet, judging glances swept across the long dining tables. Port commissioners shook their heads in distaste. A local press reporter at table 3 quietly adjusted his camera lens to frame my face. Julian took a step toward the edge of the stage, pulling a heavy brass cylinder key from his vest, the exact cylinder key my late father had used to secure his private maritime vault 10 years ago. "Hand over your father's master clearance key, Julian," sneered softly into the mic, his tone dripping with quiet malice. "Stop holding our company's federal port access out of pure sibling spite." "The master clearance doesn't belong to Sterling Maritime, Julian," I replied, my voice slicing through the heavy room, my fingers tightening around the silver tag marked Tango 39 in my pocket. "She's out of her mind," my stepbrother's fiancée Valerie declared loudly from table 1, setting down her champagne glass with a sharp click. "Security, remove this embarrassment before she ruins the contract signing." 2 towering private security officers stepped out from the curtained service alcove, moving swiftly toward my position, but before their hands could touch my shoulders, a sharp, authoritative voice boomed from the center table near the stage. "Touch her and you'll be answering to the Department of the Army," a towering figure commanded, rising smoothly from his chair. The entire hall went dead silent. The two security guards halted in their tracks, their eyes widening as they recognized the silver eagles pinned on the collar of the officer standing tall in his dress blue uniform, Colonel Marcus Vance, Deputy Director of the Defense Logistics Agency, flanked by two plainclothes federal agents. Colonel Vance adjusted his jacket, his expression carved from granite, and walked straight toward the stage, his polished shoes clicking against the parquet floor. He passed Richard, past Julian, and stopped 3 inches in front of my stepfather. "Colonel Vance," Richard stammered, his booming confidence instantly deflating into nervous sweat. What is the meaning of this interruption? This is a private corporate gala celebrating our federal distinction. Sierra is nothing but a low-level administrative clerk who was reprimanded for insubordination." Colonel Vance slowly turned his head, looking down at Richard with unyielding authority. "Captain Sierra Vance is not a clerk, Mr. Sterling. She is the lead forensic investigator assigned to Operation Tango 39 by the Office of the Inspector General, and this private gala is officially under federal audit." Evelyn's hand flew to her neck, her diamond bracelet catching on her collar. Julian's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a sudden pale twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Audit?" Julian spat, trying desperately to regain his footing as he held up the brass cylinder key. "This is absurd. We hold exclusive federal maritime clearance for Port Meridian. My father inherited those operational rights from my late stepfather, Captain David Vance." "Is that what you told your investors, Julian?" I asked, stepping out of the shadows of the archway, walking steadily up the center aisle toward the stage. I pulled the tarnished silver dog tag stamped Tango 39 from my pocket and held it high under the direct beam of the overhead spotlight, the exact tag my biological father, Captain David Vance, had hidden inside his personal service trunk before his mysterious death during an overseas transport mission 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I said, my voice echoing off the high wooden rafters with surgical clarity. My biological father died during a classified cargo run. Within 48 hours of his official death notification, my mother married Richard Sterling. Within 6 months, all of my father's maritime assets, his deep water transit permits, and his private security bonds were absorbed into Sterling Maritime Logistics. "Your father was deeply in debt when he died," Evelyn interjected, her voice rising in a pitch of frantic defensiveness. "Richard saved us from complete financial ruin. We sacrificed everything to raise you." "If Richard saved us from ruin," I said, turning directly toward Colonel Vance, "then why did a forensic audit of my father's military insurance policy reveal that his $4 million combat death benefit was deposited into an offshore account in Grand Cayman 4 days before his official casualty report was signed?" A sharp, collective gasp echoed across the 64 guests. Several port commissioners sat up straight, their faces hardening as they looked toward Richard. "That's a lie," Richard shouted, his face turning a dark, mottled purple as he gripped the podium. "These are manufactured conspiracy theories. She forged those financial claims because she was written out of my will." "We didn't forge the bank records, Mr. Sterling," Colonel Vance said calmly, pulling a thick blue federal binder from his briefcase and opening it on the main table. "We cross-referenced the routing numbers on the Cayman account with the corporate tax filings of Sterling Maritime. The account was opened using your personal federal tax ID, signed by you and co-signed by your son, Julian." "Julian?" Evelyn gasped, turning her head toward her son, her eyes wide with sudden, genuine shock. "Julian, what is he talking about? You told me those offshore accounts were set up for Sierra's education trust." "Shut your mouth, Mom," Julian snapped, his refined composure shattering as he stepped back from the microphone, his hands shaking violently around the brass cylinder key. "I didn't sign what Richard told me to sign," Evelyn cried, her voice cracking as she backed away from her husband. "He told me it was standard probate procedure. He told me David's military pension was insolvent." "Silence, both of you," Richard screamed, slamming his fist onto the wooden podium, his eyes wildly scanning the room for an exit. None of this matters. The maritime access contracts are already executed. The Department of Defense cleared our fleet 4 days ago. They cleared your fleet because you were using my father's high-grade security clearance code, code Tango 39, a code you stole from his personal safe after he died, a code that was meant to protect government supply lines, not shield your illegal cargo from federal customs. "What illegal cargo?" Julian yelled, his voice breaking into a panicked screech. "We transport standard commercial freight." I reached into my uniform pocket and pulled out a small encrypted memory drive and held it up for the room and the press reporter to see. 3 nights ago, an automated CID surveillance unit intercepted a Sterling maritime container vessel at Dock 14, I said, looking straight into Julian's eyes. Inside 3 sealed crates marked emergency relief supplies, federal agents discovered $60 million worth of undeclared, non-taxed industrial electronics bound for unauthorized international buyers, and every single container was stamped with my late father's forged military signature. The room erupted into absolute chaos. Port Authority officials jumped to their feet, shouting in outrage. Investors began furiously gathering their folders, while the reporter's camera flashed repeatedly, capturing every second of Richard's meltdown. "You ruined us!" Richard screamed, throwing the microphone to the floor with a deafening screech, charging toward me with his fists clenched. "You bitter, ungrateful brat! I gave you a roof over your head. I made your family rich." Before Richard could take 3 steps across the stage, the 2 plainclothes federal agents leapt up the steps, grabbing his arms, twisting them behind his back, and forcing him down onto the stage floor. The heavy, metallic click-click of steel handcuffs echoed loudly over the sound system. "Richard Sterling, Julian Sterling," the lead agent declared firmly, "you are arrested for multi-million-dollar federal defense fraud, military pension embezzlement, illegal maritime smuggling, and grand identity theft." "Julian, do something!" Valerie screamed from table 1, throwing her engagement ring onto the table before turning and rushing out the side exit. Julian didn't answer. He dropped the brass cylinder key, his knees giving out as an agent pulled his wrists behind his back, securing him in handcuffs while he wept hysterically on the carpet. Evelyn stood frozen at the center of the stage, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she looked from her arrested husband to her handcuffed son, her prestigious social standing, her wealth, and her family empire collapsing into utter ruin in front of the entire city elite. "Sierra, please," Evelyn sobbed, taking a step toward me, her eyes filled with desperate, frantic pleading. "I'm your mother. I didn't know about the smuggling. I didn't know what they were doing to your father's legacy. You have to tell them I'm innocent. You can't let them take me, too." I stood straight, my shoulders back, my chin held high, looking at my mother with cool, unshakable calm. "You called me a mistake in a uniform, Mom. And tonight, I'm proud to show you what that mistake looks like." As the federal agents escorted Richard and Julian down the center aisle, past a crowd of furious investors who were already canceling their contracts, Colonel Vance walked onto the stage and stood beside me. He didn't offer superficial sympathy. He snapped his heels together and delivered a crisp, flawless salute, a salute of profound military honor for the daughter who had brought truth back to her father's name. Slowly, every military veteran, port worker, and honest civil servant in the room stood to their feet, erupting into a powerful, rising standing ovation that echoed through the grand oak rafters, honoring the officer who had stood her ground against absolute corruption. I held my head high, feeling the cold weight of the silver dog tag in my palm, knowing that 10 years of lies had finally dissolved into the permanent, unyielding victory of earned justice. You cannot cure a toxic family by sacrificing your integrity, your truth, or your honor. For 6 long years, I allowed my stepfather and mother to manipulate my sense of duty, believing that my silent endurance was protecting my mother and honoring my late father's memory. I let them insult my military service, belittle my achievements, and steal my family legacy because I foolishly believed that maintaining family harmony was worth any personal cost. But manipulative, greedy people do not view your patience as love. They view it as a weakness to be exploited. They will steal your hard work, destroy your reputation, and attempt to erase your worth, all while playing the victim the instant their corruption is brought into the light. True peace does not come from quietly tolerating abuse to shield those who betray you. True peace comes from standing firm in your integrity, walking boldly into the light of truth, and allowing the unyielding consequences of their own choices to tear down their lies. Never set yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm.